The turning point. Karoline Leavitt sat in the quiet hum of the office, the weight of the moment settling in around her. Across from her, her legal team meticulously combed through every document, every possible course of action. This wasn't just about personal reputation. It was about accountability, about exposing the hypocrisy of the very media that claimed to stand for fairness and integrity. The network was in free fall. Advertisers had begun pulling out at an alarming rate. The show's ratings plummeted overnight, and executives scrambled in damage control mode. The hosts who had once laughed at Karoline now found themselves at the center of a controversy they could no longer control. Inside media circles, the panic was undeniable. Anonymous sources leaked reports of executive meetings filled with shouting, networks desperate to contain the fallout, and producers regretting ever greenlighting that segment. The full unedited clip had painted an undeniable picture, not of a debate, but of an ambush. And people weren't just watching. They were taking action. The public backlash. Social media exploded. The public saw through the charade, and the response was swift and brutal. What was once a one-sided attempt to discredit her had now become a rallying cry for media accountability. Political commentators from both sides, even some who had been critical of Karoline in the past, spoke out against the show's blatant bias. The network tried everything to shift the conversation. They released statements, sent their damage control team into overdrive, and even offered Karoline a follow-up interview in an attempt to smooth things over. But Karoline wasn't interested in playing their game. Her silence only made things worse for them. The lawsuit rumors grew stronger. People weren't just calling for apologies. They wanted resignations. Calls flooded the network's headquarters, demanding accountability. Ratings collapsed. Sponsors distanced themselves. And within a week, one of the show's main hosts was on leave, a move clearly meant to quiet the outrage. Karoline's next move. While the media spiraled, Karoline remained composed. She didn't rush to respond. Instead, she strategized. She let the media burn itself out, allowing the full weight of the consequences to settle before making her next move. Finally, she broke her silence, not with a tweet storm or a fiery press conference, but with one simple, calculated statement. They tried to silence me. They failed. That was it. 5 words. And yet, they carried more power than any rebuttal could have. The media had expected anger, outrage, counterattacks, but what they got was calm, controlled strength. And that, more than anything, was what terrified them the most. The fallout. Days later, the network officially canceled the show. The hosts who had mocked Karoline, their reputations were in ruins. The network executives who had approved the segment, publicly humiliated. And Karoline? She walked away unscathed, stronger than ever. Because when integrity meets resilience, no amount of media manipulation can change the truth. And the people who once laughed at her, now, they were the ones begging for mercy. The trial that changed everything. The former producer sat before the packed courtroom, microphone adjusted, hands steady. The world was watching. She cleared her throat, her voice firm but controlled. Producers were given pre-show instructions to cut off conservative guests, frame their responses in a way that made them look incompetent, and, if necessary, make last-minute edits to alter the narrative. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The defense team shifted uncomfortably, their carefully rehearsed strategies falling apart in real time. The prosecution wasted no time. "Did you personally witness this happening?" Karoline's attorney asked. The former producer nodded. Yes, repeatedly. It was common practice. Then came the documents, memos, internal emails, call logs. Everything pointed to one undeniable truth. Karoline's treatment hadn't been an accident. It had been a deliberate, premeditated effort to discredit her. The jury sat still, taking it all in. The network's reputation, once seen as a pillar of media influence, was unraveling before their eyes. The network's desperate defense. The network's lawyers scrambled. Miss Leavitt knew what she was walking into, the lead attorney argued. Political debate is tough. She simply couldn't handle it. But the prosecution was ready. Political debate is tough. Karoline's lawyer echoed. But is it debate when one side is set up to fail before they even open their mouth? Silence. They weren't just exposing what had happened to Karoline. They were pulling back the curtain on how the entire media machine operated. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The whistleblower's bombshell. A second whistleblower stepped forward, a former high-ranking producer who had worked for the network for nearly a decade. They testified that the systematic silencing of conservative voices wasn't just limited to one show. It was an unspoken policy across the entire network. We were encouraged to push certain narratives, suppress certain viewpoints, and control the way stories were presented, they admitted. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The headlines wrote themselves. Media manipulation exposed. Insider confirms bias at major network. Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit blows the lid off political censorship. A day of reckoning for the media industry. The network was finished. The verdict that shocked the nation. The trial lasted weeks, but the jury deliberated for only a few hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. The network was guilty of professional harm. The network was guilty of media bias and defamation. The network was guilty of intentional reputational damage. The ruling was devastating, a landmark case that set a new precedent for media accountability. The network was forced to issue a public apology. The show's entire production team was fired. Fines totaling millions were imposed. And most importantly, Karoline won. She wasn't just vindicated. She had made history. The aftermath. A new era begins. As Karoline stepped outside the courthouse, thousands of supporters cheered. Reporters shoved microphones forward, desperate for a statement. She took a deep breath, met their gaze, and said simply, "This was never about me. It was about the truth." And today, the truth won. Her words rippled across the country. The case wasn't just about one woman. It was about holding power accountable. More lawsuits followed. More media figures were exposed. Networks scrambled to review their policies. The era of unchecked media bias was over. And the people who once tried to silence Karoline? Now, they were the ones begging for mercy. The reckoning of media bias. Karoline Leavitt's victory. The courtroom was tense. Every seat filled with journalists, legal experts, and spectators eager to witness a case that had shaken the media industry to its core. The air buzzed with anticipation as Karoline Leavitt's legal team presented one final piece of damning evidence, an internal email that had been leaked from the network's producers. She read it aloud, her voice steady and clear. Do not let her finish full sentences. Keep control. Mock lightly. Make her lose credibility. The entire room fell silent. The illusion of fair journalism crumbled in an instant. This was not just a tough interview. It was an orchestrated hit job. The network's weak defense. The network's lawyers scrambled to regain control. The show is entertainment, not hard journalism, they argued. All guests are expected to handle tough questioning. But Karoline's team was ready. They played a video montage, a side-by-side comparison of how liberal guests were treated versus how conservative guests were handled. One side showed polite, uninterrupted discussions, friendly nods, and softball questions. The other showed constant interruptions, sarcasm, mocking laughter, and cheap shots disguised as debate. The jury watched in silence. The contrast was undeniable. Then came the financial records. Karoline's attorneys presented hard data, proving that the network's smear campaign had caused real financial harm. Speaking engagements were canceled. Professional opportunities disappeared. Her reputation was deliberately damaged. This was no longer just about a biased interview. It was about a calculated attempt to silence her. At that moment, everything shifted. The verdict that changed everything. The jury deliberated quickly. When they returned, the world held its breath. The judge called the courtroom to order. The foreperson stood, clearing their throat before reading the decision. In the matter of defamation and professional harm, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Karoline Leavitt. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. The network's legal team paled, their once confident expressions now replaced with defeat. Karoline closed her eyes for a brief moment, exhaling as the weight of the battle lifted. The fallout, a media empire crumbles. The damages were massive. a multi-million-dollar settlement, a public admission of wrongdoing, a formal apology, not just to Karoline, but to every guest who had been manipulated. But the fallout didn't stop there. The talk show was permanently canceled. Advertisers pulled out. The network had become too toxic to touch. More employees came forward, exposing even more unethical practices. What started as one lawsuit turned into a full-scale media reckoning. Karoline's rise. A new era begins. Karoline didn't just survive, she thrived. Her career skyrocketed. Book deals, speaking engagements, a stronger platform than ever before. But she didn't use it to gloat. Instead, she left the world with one powerful message. It's not about silencing people you disagree with. It's about accountability. The media isn't supposed to manufacture reality. It's supposed to report it. And that was a message no one could ignore. A call to action. The fight for truth continues. Karoline's victory wasn't just personal. It was a turning point for media ethics. The fight against bias, censorship, and manipulation isn't over. If this story made you think, share it. Join the conversation about media accountability. Because the truth, it always comes out. Lesson from Karoline Leavitt's victory: the power of standing your ground. Karoline's story is a reminder that truth and integrity always matter, even when the odds seem stacked against you. In today's world, where misinformation spreads quickly and people are judged before they are heard, it's more important than ever to stand firm in your beliefs. Don't be afraid to challenge bias, question narratives, and demand accountability. Whether in media, politics, or everyday life, your voice matters. The truth has power, but only if we have the courage to defend it. Stand up, speak out, demand the truth,